Um, to start with, I wanted to give you a quick financial report because we're being responsible for our funds. So far, since we started our fundraising campaign, we have taken in $5,130. 1,630 was from the yard sale. Thank you very much to everybody who contributed goods and worked it. Marianne and Jay doing the yeoman's work, picking things up and everything. And so, as Larry mentioned, it does cost things to keep this going. And so we spend approximately $550 a month between utilities, insurance, just maintenance, all that sort of stuff. So that's what we're trying to raise. We're trying to raise $12,000 this year so that we have a nice cushion to, keep everything flowing smoothly. So besides that, we have a lot of outflow for stamps. We've been doing Jan and Wendy have been doing their postcard parties. They'll be every Saturday pretty much between now and close to the election. And so it takes a lot of stamps to send those postcards out. So what else? I don't know. I'm going to post something. Maybe we'll have Marilyn send it out in an email or something, just a rundown of the finances. So, because I really want to keep you all up to date. So the next thing is that we need some help with our voter registration events coming up at Fife for the UFO Festival. I could use one or two people from the 10 to 12 slot. You can be brand new people because I have a couple of experienced people who are going to be there, trying to make sure that if you're doing this for the first time, you have somebody with you that knows the ropes and can show you what to do. All right, so see me if that's a possibility. Otherwise, I will be calling you. That event is pretty well squared away. We could use another person from 2 to 4, and that's the breakdown session. We usually start packing up about 3:30. So depends on the crowd. But Sylvania, we've got a whole bunch of new folks coming to help us out. But we could use a few folks between 2 and 5. So a couple of hours, that's all we're asking. Makes a huge difference. Very exciting when you have young people coming up and getting their voter registration application. Okay, Fife is this Saturday, 8/24. The festival is from 9 to 4, and the Sylvania one on Labor Day, 9/2, is from 10 to 5. Okay, and I have all the information about locations and stuff like that, so I'll get those to you. We'll also need people for Boom Days because I will be out of town and will not be able to be here with you all. So we need some folks to help with the office. Unfortunately, I'll be gone for 2 weeks in September, and I'm generally here Tuesday through Fridays. And so if you have any time available to come sit at the desk and wave to people, and we'll put you on postcards and make your life interesting, and you can contribute to democracy. Okay.
Let me comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting up there these days when she's not here, there's several times when I've done it and I'm sitting there, people go by, I try to wave at them. I can do things like I'll sit and do my work, but I have had people from out of town come in.
Mm-hmm.
I just a few weeks ago, I had someone come in from out of town. He was walking by, I think it was from Detroit, and he was so tickled to see us here and active that even though he was never going to come in and work with us, he pulled out a 20 and handed it to me before he left.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know what you can, and I hope I don't jinx it by saying, but I've never had anybody nasty come in.
If you do want to make a pledge, go ahead and fill out a little sheet on your table. We always appreciate it. Like I said, we're pushing for that 12,000 this year. But let's get on with the show. Stephen Stetson is here from Planned Parenthood. He's been the director since the fall of 2021. it's been Planned Parenthood has been in Alabama since the 1930s and currently maintains a health center open to the public in Birmingham. The Southeast Group is a regional affiliate of the Planned Parenthood, covers Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. Stephen was a lobbyist and attorney who previously worked at the Sierra Club, directing work on clean energy policy. His focus is on administrative law and public service commission advocacy as related to the utility sector and renewable energy. Before that, he spent a decade in anti-poverty public policy advocacy for a nonprofit based in Montgomery, with a particular emphasis on criminal justice and consumer lending and public transportation policy. He has a law degree from University of Alabama, an undergraduate in journalism from the University of Texas in Austin, and he lives in Montgomery with his pound puppy Clover and 2 cats, Omni and Snowden. So, that's quite impressive.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Marianne, who was my email contact. And thank you, Larry and Lynn. Just really appreciate y'all being here and feeding me. And I know I'm competing with the DNC, so it is my goal to get y'all out of here in time to see both Obamas speak. And if I start to run long, just get that wasp spray, and I'll get the message. I only have two bits of knowledge about Fort Payne. I was up here some years ago with my wife, and we went to a junk store. It's sort of one of the things we like to do is we shop for, she would say antiques, I would say junk. And we bought a poster up here from the Works Progress Administration. Y'all that are history nerds or democratic politics nerds may remember the effort by the federal government to employ people, and this thing said USA Works, and it had a WPA number stenciled to it. So bought this thing for $10 and went home and looked up the number. It turned out it was not actually a WPA project from here. It was actually, I don't know how it got down here, but it was a courthouse renovation project up in Massachusetts. But this was essentially a "Your Tax Dollars at Work" sign coming out of the Depression to let people know that their federal dollars were helping to do this courthouse renovation project. So a year or two passed, we had that thing framed. It just looked really cool, kind of had a flag on it. And we got admission to the Antiques Roadshow when it came to Birmingham a couple years ago. And I got to be on TV. I got to be on the Antiques Roadshow with my Fort Payne WPA poster. And so I always have a lot of fond memories of that, and went a little bit viral in the college football community because when the guy told me what the poster was worth, my immediate reaction was, well, roll Tide. And the only other thing I know about Fort Payne is that my friend, not the only other thing I know it's the sock capital. I know some things, but that's right. Yeah, I did some selfies with the Alabama statues over there. But a guy that I did some lobbying work with, I was at Alabama Arise, but David Stout was a former mayor of Fort Payne, and he came down after working at AEA and did some lobbying work. So I always liked hearing his stories about this place. But thanks for the invite. I think the bio explained some about Planned Parenthood. I'm a history nerd, as you can tell, is that it's been in Alabama since the 1930s. And that's really important because this is not a fly-by-night national operation that just set up shop here. The Jefferson County physicians for, I think it was something like parental responsibility. It became Planned Parenthood back in the 30s. But this is a long-term effort that shows that this is outside of the typical sort of heat of the partisan moment. Planned Parenthood has been here helping equip people to make decisions about their lives and make sensible, informed decisions about how and whether to grow their families or not. And so there's been a little bit of turnover at Planned Parenthood. We just announced, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, that our affiliate CEO is leaving. So it's 3 states, I think was mentioned. It's Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. And so Planned Parenthood Federation of America is the big national entity that you see these headlines throwing millions of dollars into various campaign races or whatever. Our 3-state affiliate is 3 interesting Deep South states. A lot of attention in Georgia for obvious reasons. It's a place where we have the most opportunity to swing partisan decisions, but we also have been active here. And so we endorse Maryland lands, and we can talk a little bit more about sort of the state of play in the Alabama legislature. But our Birmingham Health Center is open for business. We did close our Mobile Health Center after the Dobbs decision came, and we'd like to reopen that. So that's a temporary closure, but we're still serving our patients in Birmingham. And if you take nothing else away, it's that we're still on the front lines guidelines, providing reproductive health care to people, and we're intending to keep it that way. We're not just leaving because of the Dobbs decision. And so what I really wanted to do tonight was to kind of bridge the gap between last legislative session and the coming legislative session. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you is about what happened in 24 and sort of the things that we were working on that we cared about. But I'm also going to try my best to build a preview of what's coming. And now, you know, it's August, so we don't know exactly what all is going to go down in February in the coming spring. But I think during the off season is when it's most important that we mobilize, organize, and get prepared for, because when the legislative session starts next spring, it's really hard to do planning on the fly. We have our coalition partners, but the strategy and sort of emphasis of what we're trying to do really needs to be happening now during football season as we get ready for the holiday quarter. That's when you get ready for the legislative session. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did. We had some wins and some losses, but I also want to sort of tip our vision forward to the coming year. So we started back in February. Feels like a lifetime ago. The GOP leadership announced at the beginning of the session that they were going to really focus on the school voucher stuff, and they really wanted to do gambling. They announced they were going to take 2 spring breaks, which those of us who are lobbyists appreciated. But big picture-wise, I think the overall story of the session that concluded this past May was the school voucher stuff that passed, a bunch of the bad culture war stuff that did unfortunately pass, a lot of red meat for their base. They banned DEI. They spent a bunch of time attacking the state archives. They were attacking librarians. The death of Birmingham Southern, I think, was something that I will take away from this legislative session. And then this IVF issue that I want to talk to y'all a little bit about. We got national headlines because of the Alabama Supreme Court's decision in February, what we're calling the LePage case. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that as well. So that's kind of the overview. But one neat thing about this past legislative session for us is we started with a rare goal for our side. A lot of times we're just playing defense. We're just trying to kill bad bills, which is important, but we kind of got this idea together to play some offense behind a bill that was A, bipartisan, and B, had a good chance to pass. So it's not this, you don't have to take notes on this number, but SB 62 was by Senator Arthur Orr, who's out of Decatur, and it had 24 co-sponsors. Now, you may have seen some headlines around this that were calling it the pink tax. Well, we didn't really love this framing because it's actually a tax cut. It's not the pink tax. It was actually a tax cut. And I'm not sure I like the color pink associated with it either. I mean, we just need some better framing around this. But essentially what it would do was, y'all recall all this debate about the grocery tax waiver, and we were trying to lift the sales tax on groceries the whole time that I was at Alabama or Rise. That was a big priority, was to deal with the regressive cash register sales tax at the grocery store, which most states do not tax groceries. Here in Alabama, we had a full 4% sales tax on groceries, and so that momentum carried them through. There was sort of a partial lifting of the grocery tax that was then conditioned on more economic growth. So we can bracket the conversation about the grocery tax, but that momentum pushed us into a world where even conservatives were like, what other sales taxes can we cut? So Senator Orr had this idea to lift the sales tax on essentially maternity clothing, menstrual hygiene products, baby diapers, and infant formula. All of which sounded real good to us. We thought that in a world, I don't love a lot of the tax cutting rhetoric, but if you're going to cut taxes, that might be a good place to start. The regressive sales tax that impacts low income people at the cash register. And so we felt good. We encouraged Senator Orr to include infant formula on that list of products. So that was a win. And y'all just know infant formula, diapers, that stuff is really expensive. So even Senator Orr, who's very conservative, voted by CPAC as one of the more conservative members of the legislature, described those sales taxes as an unfair tax on half of the population. Also significant, he is the chair of the ETF budget committee. So he was in a position to kind of help this move. The revenue that would come from that sales tax cut would have come out of the ETF budget. So we were originally worried there was going to be some pushback from the Grocers Association. We were worried they had some concerns about how you program the cash registers. So when I get up to the sort of cash register at the grocery store, I've got some dishwashing detergent and a bag of apples and then some diapers. And how does the computer know which items to fully tax and which not to? But that didn't turn out to be too much of a concern. And the other question was whether localities could opt out of the sales tax. So there's a state sales tax and there's a local sales tax. So whether the city of Fort Payne could still continue to charge their share of the tax, that sort of became a conversation with the League of Municipalities and some of those other entities. But really, none of those things slowed it down. The bill flies through Senator Orr's committee. Representative Neil Rafferty out of Birmingham agreed to carry the companion in the House. So that meant that there was a strong Republican sponsor and a strong Democrat sponsor. And so we thought by mid-March or so, we were good to go and that we were going to coast to victory. We were having some success in describing this as a pro-family approach. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the IVF debate in a minute, but framing it up as a pro-family tax policy really helped. And so conservatives wanted to cut taxes and liberals wanted to help low-income people. So it seemed like kind of a win-win there. We didn't really do a whole lot of public activity because it seemed kind of like it was teed up to pass already. And I'll just be honest, I'm coming from Planned Parenthood. So the idea that Planned Parenthood says something's good could cause some red flags in the eyes of some of the more conservative members of the legislature. So we were kind of keeping it behind the scenes, low profile conversation. And I'll just say it was frustrating about 2 weeks before the session was scheduled to end that people started murmuring about whether we would have enough money in the budget to cover a tax cut. And this is very frustrating. Our government is spending more than $1 billion to build new prisons. Are you kidding me that the pennies on the dollar for diapers and infant formula is what we need to make the schools have funding? It felt really rough. So we basically had a fiscal note that said that cutting the sales tax on those things would take about $8.7 million out of the ETF and maybe about $2.5 million out of the general fund. And if you included the local portion, that's another $15 million. So just to give you some figures of what we're working with. But to give you a bit of point of comparison, and I promise I'm going to wind down the tax nerd portion of this here in a minute, but the last legislative session, they passed a bill that would exempt overtime taxes they would exempt overtime pay from taxes. And they thought at the time that would cost the state budget $35 million. Well, oops, they did the math wrong, and it turns out it would be $185 million. So they just did their math wrong, and there's a $50 million rounding error in the tax cut economic impact. So suddenly, as we're arguing over $8 or $9 million on the sales tax coming from this, limited things on the grocery aisle, there are bigger fish to fry. So ultimately, this bill did not pass. Unfortunately, the tax cut didn't come into law. But we think it'll be back this year, and we would like it, if there's no other takeaway from what I say tonight, it would be to urge your lawmakers to push for this sales tax cut. I think even if your lawmakers are very conservative, they will say cutting taxes at the grocery store is real relief, money back in the pockets of people at the cash register, and it might be able to get some traction. So we're really hopeful that this bill will pass. And we need to think about this pink tax framing. We're going to work with our communications people and see if we can get something better than calling this the pink tax. It's a tax cut. It's not a tax. And, it's just something about that, gendering of the colors that just doesn't sit right with me. The other huge headline story from this past legislative session, I mentioned the Alabama Supreme Court's decision. The case was called LePage, and essentially what they ruled, I'll give you the full little law school synopsis here, which is that you may already know this, but for those of you who don't, there was a fertility clinic attached to a medical facility down in the Mobile area, and somebody didn't lock the door in between the two, and somebody wandered from the medical side over into the fertility clinic side. Somebody wasn't supposed to be there, and for whatever reason, they picked up a tray of frozen samples and just started fiddling around with it, dropped it, broke it, destroyed it. So tens of thousands of dollars or whatever of people's, frozen IVF samples, their fertilized eggs that they had been meaning to freeze there in the fertility clinic, were destroyed. Well, you might think, that sounds like a lawsuit. And sure enough, it was. These people were mad. That was their property, right? And so they sued and said, hey, you should have locked the door. You don't need trespassers coming into the fertility clinic where they're not supposed to be and fiddling around with the medical specimens. Well, that lawsuit, as it turned out, not only claimed your usual negligence and your torts or whatever, but it said that under the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, there was a specific relief that the owners of these samples were seeking. Now, the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act might be if I have a swimming pool in my backyard and I don't put up a fence around it and your little 3-year-old comes over and falls in and drowns, then you can sue me. Your minor was wrongfully injured by my negligence. That might not be what you think applies in this case, but that's certainly what they claimed. They said that due to the negligence of the clinic, that these minors were destroyed or injured by the facility. And that case goes up to the Alabama Supreme Court, who says, yes, for the purposes of the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, these frozen test tubes legally constitute children under Alabama law. And what happens? The world goes crazy because the definition of children has just been expanded from dancing around singing songs that they watch on YouTube to this tiny little sample that lives in a freezer. So we were not providing IVF. We don't do IVF at our health center, but because we care about questions of personhood and autonomy, we weighed in and we were like, this is a very dangerous expansion of the interpretation of what constitutes personhood. And all of the IVF clinics that operate in the state of Alabama said, whoa, 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 we're not doing anything. No more IVF for anyone, because our lawyers and our risk assessment people are telling us that we are now in possession of freezer after freezer of tens of thousands of children. And we don't know if we have to redraw the census districts to reflect the fact that these are now people that live in our freezers. But the Alabama Supreme Court called them embryonic children and said that these were nurseries. And here we are. So the extension of Alabama's personhood amendment, which was passed, and it's part of our overall abortion ban in Alabama, where we do not allow abortion, even in cases of sexual assault, even in cases of incest. Here we are. That was cited in the footnotes of the Alabama Supreme Court decision, along with more Bible verses than you might expect that were cited as legally binding authority in the footnotes to this case. So it was one of the most impressive acts of political mobilization I have ever seen. I've been doing this since I graduated law school in 2007. I started doing lobbying in 2008. And I've been at the Alabama State House basically since 2008, and I've seen a lot of stuff. But these moms that showed up in their matching t-shirts, pushing their strollers, holding their babies that were born because of IVF were furious that they were no longer able to access IVF care in Alabama because of this Alabama Supreme Court decision. So the Alabama legislature said, we've got to do something. We care about families. Even President Trump, even Senator Tuberville said, look, we're actually pro-IVF too. Even some of the Alabama lawmakers on the floor of the legislature said that what's happening in our IVF clinics constitutes genocide. So some of them were in favor of the Alabama Supreme Court's decision, but most saw the political writing on the wall and said, no, 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 we've got to do something. We've got to get this IVF ball rolling again. We need UAB helping people do IVF. So they passed not a revision of the definition of personhood, not any sort of repeal of the amendment. They just said, we're going to give IVF clinics in Alabama complete blanket immunity and a liability shield from any lawsuits that might otherwise impede them from doing IVF. And so that was good enough for UAB. This thing rolled through. It went through real fast. It passed. Governor Ivey signed it into law. UAB says, okay, we're going to start doing IVF again. Nobody can sue us for anything. We got, let's get the money train rolling again. Mobile, down there where the inciting incident happened, did not restart IVF. As far as I know, they're still not doing IVF. But if I'm offering you a prediction about the 2025 legislative session, I think they will come back and try to fix this a little bit more. That this liability shield and this immunity they have extended to IVF clinics is not sufficient to clear up the questions of personhood. Conservative folks have already sued, saying that the Alabama Supreme Court got it right, that the law, the liability shield that the legislature passed is unconstitutional because the Alabama Supreme Court in the LePage decision already ruled that those frozen samples in the freezer, those are children. So we're going to see another legal fight. We're going to see this continue. I don't know if this law will get struck down or not. But I do think that where I would like to see the political energy go, if I was giving you a little bit of homework assignment or some marching orders or some encouragement, I would encourage you to take the outrage that you may be feeling in your heart right now and say that we need to repeal the personhood amendment that was at the core of the IVF decision. And if the Alabama legislature in all of its infinite wisdom wants to keep abortion illegal, we can have that conversation. But the repeal of the personhood amendment that was the crux of the Supreme Court's decision, that might be a way of pulling that Jenga block out and giving us an opportunity to reopen the conversation. And if the polling numbers are correct, that people actually do want Roe v. Wade to remain the law of the land in Alabama instead of the Dobbs decision, then maybe we can have that discussion there. But so this IVF thing might be a window into political advocacy. Okay. I'm going to tell you I'm going to give you a couple more things here about the legislative session in the past, and then I would love to take some questions. So please be percolating some questions if you have them. There was one really good bill that did not pass that came from Senator Figures down in Mobile. It was a constitutional amendment that essentially was a lot like what Ohio just did. If y'all ever saw what Ohio did in regards to sort of preserving reproductive freedom, that bill did not advance. It did not come out of committee, but I think there's a possibility that Senator Figures will reintroduce that bill in the coming year, and it might give us a talking point of a sort of broad omnibus style reproductive freedom constitutional amendment. Now again, the composition of the legislature is not especially favorable to that sort of thing, but it might give us something that we can push on the good side, just so that we're not against everything. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a couple of bad bills that we know that are coming back. These are bills that we threw up our hands and celebrated that they were killed at the end of last session, but the people who supported these bills are not going to give up either. They're not just going to go home and tuck their tail between their legs. They're going to be back. So there was a bill from Gerald Allen, who's a senator out of Tuscaloosa, and it was carried in the House by a member of the House of Representatives from Russellville. But what they want to do is they want to give tax credits to people who donate to crisis pregnancy centers. So I don't know if y'all know about CPCs or crisis pregnancy centers, but they are non-medical places that give pregnant people advice and oftentimes employ non-scientific information and guilt people about what they're doing when they're pregnant. And some of them do some decent stuff. Sometimes they give you infant formula and diapers, and they have a very warm and inviting place, but these people are not doctors. These people are ideologically motivated to push people to have these children. And they can exist, certainly, but I'm not sure the state budget, which I just talked about, which needs every dollar we have, should be in a position to lose a bunch of money because if you donate your money to a CPC, then you no longer have to pay taxes on that. So we strongly oppose that bill, and we highly anticipate that it will come back next session. So opposition to CPC tax credits is going to be one big priority. Number two, this may sound like I just stepped out of a time machine from the 1990s, but y'all, the sex ed debate is back. These abstinence-only people, they're still here. They're still in power. And they've stopped calling it abstinence only, and they've started calling it sexual risk avoidance. But it's abstinence only. And it was HB 195, Representative Susan DuBose from the beautiful little town near Birmingham of Hoover. And DuBose brought this mega bill that would have basically banned even talking about sex unless it was to discourage sex, especially sex outside of marriage, which is, as we know. I mean, so this bill was profoundly dangerous, profoundly risky, and it did not pass, fortunately. It died on the last day of session, and we were sitting up there till the last clock struck midnight waiting for them to adjourn. But we think that DuBose's sex ed bill is likely to come back, and we need to be vigilant about it, because if you want to look at the statistics about Alabama's teen pregnancy rates, Alabama's STI rates, all the things that our young people don't know about sex, this bill would make it all worse. So all the local boards of education are prevented from doing any kind of health classes that relate to non-marital sexual activity or, anything that would, quote, normalize teen sexual activity or promote or encourage non-marital sexual activity. That's going to be back. And I think we need to be on the front lines about that. One last thing I'll say here of a bill we anticipate to come back, it was HB 378, and they're really obsessed right now on what they call abortion trafficking. So again, someone comes into our Planned Parenthood Health Center in Birmingham, they don't want to be pregnant. We're very limited on what we can tell them to do. Representative Gidley from Gadsden wants to be sure that if I have a niece who wants to leave Alabama to maybe go to Illinois where they can get an abortion, if that niece stops at my house and I give them some food, or maybe I fill up their car with some gas, I could go to jail. It's a criminally prosecutable offense under this abortion trafficking bill. And not only could I be criminally prosecuted if I aid and assist someone who's seeking to leave our jurisdiction to receive abortion care, that person's parents would have a private right of action to sue me. So let's be aware that not only have they forbid abortion care in Alabama, but they are seeking to prevent us from helping anyone who even wants to leave the borders of our state. Now, I guess if you come over to my house and you want to drive over to Mississippi and buy a lottery ticket, I could probably do that. So you can still leave our jurisdiction to go, break Alabama law in a jurisdiction where it's not illegal over in other places. But that's kind of where they're thinking. They're seeking to not only control your behavior here within the state of Alabama, but they are seeking to prohibit us from helping people even go places. Okay, so there's a couple of other bad bills. You probably heard of some stuff that you were worried about this session. I'm going to do a little potpourri of a few other things that I'm happy to talk about when we open to Q&A, and I'm happy to answer questions. There's a federal lawsuit pending about the thing that I just talked about, really. It's, our Attorney General, Steve Marshall, said that he wanted to prohibit people, if somebody came into our health center and we wanted to tell them how to get to Virginia or somewhere, Illinois, that they think that they can prohibit us from giving them plane tickets or getting them a hotel in another state. And so there's a federal lawsuit we're not parties to the lawsuit, but we've been observing it. They're seeking to create an injunction against our Attorney General or any district attorneys from prosecuting people, from helping people leave the state, aiding and abetting people from going to jurisdictions with access. You may have seen two Supreme Court cases that were really significant to us that happened in June. There was the case about mifepristone and whether the abortion drug was properly approved by the FDA. That case was essentially rejected due to standing issues, that the people who were trying to prohibit mifepristone from being on the market, it's still on the market, it's still legal because those people did not have standing to bring the lawsuit. But it is worth noting that other states have already been granted standing, and so I think we can anticipate this lawsuit coming back through federal court. All we did was get a little reprieve, and so I'm not really confident in what our existing federal judges will do about that. There was also a big case about abortion care involving the state of Idaho and the emergency room case, where the state of Idaho says we're banning people from coming in even for emergency abortions, and the question is whether the feds could condition federal funding on states complying with a federal law called EMTALA. Again, that case was dismissed at the end of June, but I think it's something that we need to keep our eye on. It's a hot legal issue. And I'm just going to touch, I guess, let me say we're okay on time. I'm going to do two other. One thing I'm excited about Planned Parenthood is we have great brand recognition and we have college campuses that are really active. So we call it the Generation Action Program. If you are ever feeling down, I know we're on an energy high and there's a new name at the top of the presidential ticket and DNC is right now, but if you're feeling your energy start to flag, let me just encourage you to look up what Generation Action college students are doing for Planned Parenthood. We have some in Tuscaloosa, in Auburn, we have some at UAB, we've got Alabama A&M, and we're continuing to grow the campus advocates who are sex positive, they're energetic, they want to give condoms to their classmates, they're really fired up, and they're talking about putting vending machines in some of the dormitories and some things like that. And so we want to be encouraging the next generation of people to have energy and to be sex positive and to be thinking about that stuff. And so these college students are a real source of energy. It's something I'm really proud of our engagement with these folks, and maybe some of them will stay in Alabama and continue to, make their communities better, run for office, etc. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that we have a congressional election coming up in the 2nd Congressional District that was just newly drawn for us down in the Montgomery across the southern strip there. It's a newly drawn district. It's not a slam dunk. It's not clear what's going to happen there. I think the polling suggests that, it's just going to be close. And so just bear in mind that that's coming up as well, that it's not just, it's not fait accompli. We helped Maryland Lands. We endorsed Maryland Lands up in the Huntsville area, and that's flipped a seat from red to blue. Maryland Lands was very open in her discussion of her own abortion. She comes from a counseling background. She actually won the special election and came down to the legislature for the very last part of the legislative session. Very impressed with Maryland Lands. She sponsored a good bill at the end of the session. It didn't go anywhere because it was the end of the session and she was brand new, but we'd like to see this bill come back. It was HB 494 and it's presumptive Medicaid eligibility. And so they presume, especially if you're pregnant, that you would qualify for Medicaid. Medicaid, and then the burden is if you make too much money to be on Medicaid that you then don't get it, but it would allow more people to get health care because it's presumed that they're allowed to be covered by Medicaid. And the final thing I'll say is I was thinking about what else I wanted to refer y'all to tonight, and there was a great piece in the Alabama Daily News from a guy named Max Rogers this morning, and he's an OBGYN, and he talks about what it was like to deliver the last baby at a hospital down near Grove Hill, which is down near Mobile. So I recommend reading this op-ed. It was really powerful. He talks about giving birth to this baby and then the maternity ward shuttering. And I think it is part of what is happening across our state that I love so much, is that rural healthcare is shrinking and dying. There are a lot of reasons for this. Rural Alabama is depopulating for a variety of reasons. Jobs, schools, we can talk more about it. It's complicated. There's no single silver bullet that will fix the rural Alabama problems. But the lack of access to healthcare is on that list. And people are having to drive hours for basic prenatal care. And the closing of that Grove Hill maternity ward is just one of several that has happened across the state. So that op-ed, I thought, from Max Rogers was really powerful. And I think if you're having a conversation with somebody, even on the other side of the partisan fence, you can have a conversation about what it means for people to have access to basic care. And that might be a starting point for a conversation. It may or may not change their opinion about Medicaid expansion, but it at least starts the conversation about what are our obligations to people who are wanting to give birth to healthy babies. 2025 session starts February 4th. We'll be there. I hope you will be there too. I hope we will see all of y'all. I'm happy to take any questions that y'all may have about the reproductive healthcare landscape in Alabama and Planned Parenthood, how we're structured, what we're doing. Anything else I can do to help y'all?
A statement with regards to some of the stuff you mentioned that's going on in Alabama, specifically with the IVF that this Alabama Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court Justice at that time, the Chief Justice Tom Parker, is a follower of the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is also associated with the Heritage Foundation, which in return is Project 2025. Alabama is one of 3 or 4 states that are the proving grounds for such lawsuits that we're seeing now. And I know you had a talk a few months ago about some of the issues of Project 2025. This is just another one. They will, if they get a Republican into the White House at any point, now or in the future, ban abortion. No excuses, no nothing. So I just wanted them to be aware of that, because I know it's not. You speak about your Planned Parenthood and you try to be a little nonpartisan, and I understand that, but I want them to know exactly that a lot of the stuff that's happening right here in Alabama are tests to see just how far they can push everything. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
A lot of good information. Susan Du Bois, she also is a strong proponent of Moms for Liberty. Last week I went to a protest over in Guntersville because they were talking about Title IX and transgenders. And I got a bit vocal, let's just say. And it was reported in that Alabama Political Reporter that there were hecklers. I was one of about 20.
Nice.
So that
If I could just build on your point a little bit and say that, it's tempting a lot of times when we're talking about this IVF decision to talk about unelected judges. That's kind of an insulting phrase to talk about these elites who are not really speaking for the people. In Alabama, we do elect our members of the Supreme Court. These are elected judges. But if you look at your ballot in November, you will see that all of the Supreme Court races that are on there but one are uncontested. So we have failed to even field candidates at this particular lightning rod time of people who can run for the Supreme Court to capitalize on the anger that people are feeling.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Mentioning all that's going on in the legislature.
My concern was the funding for the Planned Parenthood things, for the diapers and all that stuff, coming out of the Education Trust Fund, because it's taken a lot of hits in the last couple of years, and as a retired teacher, that's very important to me.
Yep.
And so, what can we do? I mean, I know we need to get some more Democrats elected, but we can't get anybody to run. Number one, be that we don't have the money to fund them, but number two, they're up against so much that it's hard to get good candidates to run. I know we've got to do that. I mean, they're not going to just be writing candidates and get.
You raise a really
elected.
important issue about revenue, and I think we have to be responsible to the ETF. So the Education Trust Fund, y'all, little tax nerd hat back on here for a second. There's the general fund, and then there's the Education Trust Fund. Alabama has two budgets. The revenue from these sales taxes would come out of the ETF, and both of my parents were public school teachers here in Alabama, so I love the ETF. It's very important. For years, when the push to repeal the grocery tax was really the topic du jour, there was a proposal on the table that would have lowered the grocery tax to zero, but raised the level at which people start to pay taxes on their federal income tax deduction. So it's known as the FIT deduction. And you could level fund it just based on however you rig the numbers so that there would be no impact on the ETF. Money comes out by losing out of the grocery tax revenue, but you could replace that revenue by closing this loophole on federal income tax. You know, you can write off your federal income tax on your Alabama taxes. So if you raise that level and make the rich pay their share, but certain people no longer pay their share of that tax loophole. So that was a really sweet proposal that unfortunately never became law. So ultimately, this grocery tax bill that passed actually was just money straight out of the ETF. And every year, there are groups coming to the legislature with their hand out saying, we want a tax cut. Just take that money out of our school system.
And Dr. Hubbard's not there to protect it anymore.
100%. The AEA Frontline and some of those other political groups that were protecting the ETF are in a different position now than they were before. So you're right. I think the question has to be, and that's sort of one of the reasons why I mentioned that Crisis Pregnancy Center tax cut bill, is we need to find what tax cuts we want to give to who, and whether the sales tax is the place where we need to be getting our revenue for schools. Should that mom buying diapers and infant formula be the reliable revenue source for our school system, or should we find a replacement source of revenue?
And the other thing is the in vitro issue. I think it's just ridiculous. They're calling those things that are, I mean, they're ridiculous. Let's say that. But the issue of abortion in Alabama being totally abolished, I mean, y'all realize you can't have a D&C? I mean, ladies, I know some of you had to have those before. I did after a miscarriage. You can't have those here in Alabama anymore. You can't have anything like that. If you have a tubal pregnancy, you just die. Or your fallopian tube's going to blow up like that girl in Texas, and now she can't have children. This is what the abortion issue is. It's not about taking a baby, getting rid of a baby just because you don't want it. That's only one kind of like 13 different kinds of abortion. Everything is because abortion means just to dispel. So it can mean any kind of procedure that women have, and we're kind of complicated creatures. And I believe that God gave us the brain to make our own decisions about that. And we certainly don't need the state to be able to have control and tell us what we can do, or else we're going to lose a lot of good women and a lot of potential children if we don't stop this. And the only way we can do it is to vote them out. So if you know any candidates that maybe they're wealthy on their own and can run, we'll get out there and help them. I believe right now, if we had a candidate running for something, we might could have gotten them elected this time. But we've got to do more than just talk about it. Sorry.
Well
get off
said.
the soapbox.
Well said. I want to add one talking point and offer this to the group. If you find yourself in a conversation that it's not just sort of an autonomy and bodily control issue, which I think is right on, and I think resonates with a lot of conservative voices. There's also an economic development angle to this, and they showed that in the states with abortion bans, their medical school residency numbers have plummeted. I think Alabama may be down 12%, and people don't want to go where they don't get a full med school education. So even UAB, the economic driver of Birmingham, is suffering in a way that reflects decisions made by lawmakers in Montgomery. So the quote that I've been sort of circulating, feel free to use it if you like it, is you don't want to go play football under a coach where the forward pass is illegal. And so these students are coming to Alabama and they're not able to learn the entire medical textbook. There's entire chapters that are off limits to them. So we will suffer the harm of a crisis in physician and provider availability. So for what it's worth.
Anything?
I think one thing with the IVF and all this protection of, and taking away women's rights, but they'll do that, but then they won't expand Medicaid to take care of children. And I do not understand why Alabama wants to take so much from people that have so little and will do nothing to help anybody that needs help. But yet they will protect, are they gonna charge the IVF tubes rent or make them pay taxes? I mean, where does that personhood, how far does that go?
So I had a friend who was doing IVF at UAB at the time that all this happened, and they were like, I'm going to take my samples and I'm going to go to Minnesota and we're going to finish our IVF there. UAB said, whoa, 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 this law has caused so much uncertainty and confusion. You can't have your samples back. Well, was that kidnapping?
Yeah. But they'll protect that, but they will not help a family not pay taxes on diapers and baby food. It's just insane.
It's because they can't think it outside of the box.
Well, they don't-
think they're state.
they're not gonna
They don't
help
look at the
anybody.
real data. It's a wanting to force births because our birth rate has been declining and there's a new report out today, it's gone down again. This isn't gonna stop. This is their entire.
But they're not gonna help you take care of that baby when they force you to have that.
Yeah, I think the language of compulsory pregnancy is possibly helpful. Is the woman in scrubs maybe had a question?
I did not go to law school, so I am not near as eloquent as a speaker as you are. I cannot thank you enough for being here tonight and expressing your thoughts and views. I have a maybe a vague question. I'm going to share a little bit because I'm actually a gynecologist, an OBGYN trained here in Birmingham. I heard you say your parents were teachers here, so I'm guessing you're an Alabama native as well.
Absolutely.
And having trained at UAB, spent 30 years now being an OBGYN, not just here, but left and trained for, did my second residency in OBGYN in Virginia. And it wasn't until I lived out of Alabama that I actually started to see I guess the environment, the climate for what it was. Sex education, for example, that you brought up in your discussion. When I was in 8th grade, I was in a magnet school in Birmingham that did try to sneak it in and give us not anything inappropriate, just the basics that helped young women, especially, understand more about their anatomy, understand how pregnancy occurred, because it amazed me at that age how little we knew. And then when I'll get to Virginia, my daughter in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade was given a family life discussion. Very basic, very cute. Actually, they took 3rd graders, separated them into boys and girls, told boys about their bodies, girls about their bodies. 4th grade, the girls learned about the boys' bodies. The boys learned about the girls' bodies. And in 5th grade, they taught basic science on reproduction, and it wasn't anything inappropriate. So my question to you, so many things you've touched on tonight affect me so greatly. I'm now an OBGYN in Alabama trying to still extend reproductive health care to my patients. I no longer live in Fort Payne. We were so behind the times. I moved here 15 years ago, and it is still such a sexist environment that as a local OBGYN delivering 100 babies for 3 years, I wasn't allowed in the doctor's lounge because I'm female. I was allowed in the nurse's lounge. So instead of having access to the scrubs I needed to change my clothes or the dictaphone to be able to dictate, I was in the nurse's lounge buying Girl Scout cookies because I couldn't get my work done. So I now commute 3 hours a day to Huntsville, which is still Alabama, but a bigger city.
Yeah.
How, having a similar background to me, obviously you have a passion for reproductive health care, working for Planned Parenthood. How do you get up every day in Alabama? Because unfortunately, I have friends all over the country that beg me to come. They see what's going on in the news. They see the way Alabama represents our climate. And it's not a great place for somebody like me, for obviously anybody in this room. And it breaks my heart because I'm looking around tonight and I recognize very few faces. And maybe I wouldn't have felt so alone the last 15 years if I had found people that thought and represented the same values I do. How do you get up every day and keep fighting for what you know is right?
Wow.
You obviously have, you've got it. Share with us, especially with me tonight, because I'm going to leave here inspired. If you can give me some hope that because the way the MAGA world might want to think the world's going to pot, I feel the opposite. I feel like what I've always believed in and have fought so hard as an advocate for my patients for is getting harder and harder. Sorry.
That's a powerful question, and I want to respect that. And I think I want to answer it by being maximum vulnerable with y'all. My wife died last month. She had pancreatic cancer. She lasted 11 months from diagnosis to dying last month. And I thought about canceling. I thought about not coming today because the question of how I get out of bed each morning has been especially hard lately. But Kate would have wanted me to come because we live in Alabama and because I'm from here and because the two options are to leave or to fight. And I have always cared about this place and the people who live in this state. I've hated meeting people from other states who make fun of our state. I hate that we're at the bottom of the list of everything good and the top of the list of everything bad. And our options are to stay and fight or to go someplace where it's easier. And I wanted to come tonight because I care about this work, and you can broaden the lens beyond just reproductive health care to include economic justice and climate change and all the other things that have been foundational reasons for me to do the work that I do. And it's not easy to come up with that reason to get up and do it, especially if it feels like you're going to lose every time. And so part of why I wanted to talk about the sales tax thing is that part of doing it is finding ways to win and finding ways that we can reach success when the odds are stacked against us. And I'll also share a little bit of ego with you and say that I feel like if I didn't do it, the person who stepped into my shoes wouldn't be as good. And I am from here, and I can talk high school and college football with people, and I know that being from here is different than showing up here for a couple of years because you're doing some kind of Peace Corps type mission and you are trying to get your civil rights merit badge by coming to Alabama, and then you're going to go back off to some other city. I'm from here, and I want it to be good for the next generation, and I want us to be better. So you ask like a deep philosophical question of how do you get up every morning? And sometimes it feels like you can't. And sometimes over the past couple of weeks, I have felt like I can't. But I wanted to come here tonight because we have to. We have to do this work.
Everybody to vote and take everybody you know that's a Democrat to the polls to vote for Harris Walz so that we can have a Democratic president who will pass a legality for women to have their rights back. But we have to have a Senate and a House also.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I want to make a really quick one. I really admire that you shared that story. And the thing that I really hope the Democrats will learn came to my mind while listening to the convention last night. Democrats are finally telling stories. You remember the young women that talked about how the abortion ban affected them? And this gentleman just told us a story. And that is how we move people. Because even though I've been a lifelong Democrat, I was born a Democrat because of my Roosevelt family. But I will say that the thing I get so damn angry with us is we're wonky. We just talk about policies. We talk about things that are in the weeds. They don't move people. But this man just told us a story. And that ought to move each and every one of us. And that is the only reason that I have joy again. I think the Democrats will win because they know how to tell a story. And I love you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank y'all for being here tonight.
Thank you.